Introduction. 3 masteries, 4 agreements. Words act as potent seeds planted within the highly fertile soil of the human mind. Yet this soil is only receptive to the specific types of seeds it has been conditioned to absorb. When a person first encounters these 4 guiding principles, a deep internal resonance often occurs, as if some hidden part of the psyche recognizes a familiar truth that was previously experienced or known, albeit perhaps not stated with such crystalline simplicity. As the principles unfold, it becomes clear that humanity has unknowingly forged thousands of personal contracts built upon the shaky foundations of making assumptions and taking the actions of others personally, effectively turning the immense power of our own language and intent against ourselves. We utilize the entirety of our creative force to construct a lived experience that virtually guarantees ongoing suffering for the duration of our lives. These 4 principles serve as an instrument of profound metamorphosis, guiding the individual away from the heavy burden of endless self-judgment and toward an entirely new paradigm of existence. They facilitate the dissolution of deeply ingrained guilt, shame, and habitual self-loathing. By dismantling the internal contracts that stifle creative expression, we make room for new pacts that actively encourage the unobstructed expression of love. The original intention behind these principles was to send a messenger directly into the reader's imagination, a messenger capable of fundamentally shifting their habitual point of view. Those who have already put these concepts into rigorous practice deeply understand their profound impact. They possess the unique ability to bypass intellectual defenses, infiltrate the complex web of personal beliefs, and plant a crucial seed of doubt regarding our self-limiting internal contracts. Through a process that feels almost akin to magic, these principles gradually liberate the vital faith that has been held hostage within our rigid belief systems. Step by step, personal integrity is reclaimed, allowing the authentic, unconditioned self to finally awaken from its long slumber. Think of these principles as a detailed map outlining the various routes available to reach a state of personal destination and liberation. Their inherent simplicity is precisely what allows them to be applied flexibly across so many different trajectories of life. However, a map only represents one half of the equation. The individual holding the map constitutes the vital other half. The written messenger forms one part of this relational dynamic, but the true beauty lies in the reader's active and willing participation. When an individual possesses a clear goal and utilizes this messenger as a compass, reaching the desired outcome becomes not just possible, but highly probable. These teachings provide the necessary framework to actively heal the wounds of the emotional body. They offer a practical method to completely dismantle an outdated worldview and construct an entirely new, self-authored paradigm of belief. This robust framework can be applied to mend marriages, deepen friendships, resolve workplace conflicts, and elevate every conceivable aspect of human interaction and existence. Yet, because it functions purely as a map, the journey must inevitably begin with a profound, unflinching awareness of one's current location and the ultimate desired destination. Millennia ago, ancient wisdom traditions established 3 distinct paths of mastery designed to guide humanity out of the labyrinth of perpetual suffering and return us to our inherent natural state of joy, liberty, and love. These traditions emphasize the absolute necessity of viewing oneself with unvarnished truth, dedicating the entire first stage of learning specifically to the cultivation of awareness. This initial stage, the mastery of awareness, represents the critical foundational step toward liberating the self, for true personal freedom remains completely impossible as long as we remain ignorant of our own nature, our current circumstances, and the specific type of liberation we are actually seeking. Through this discipline, the dense, blinding fog clouding the human mind becomes visible to the practitioner. The profound realization dawns that our entire perception is a continuous state of dreaming, a hypnotic trance shared by everybody else around us. Consequently, this initial stage of awakening is frequently referred to as the mastery of truth. The subsequent stage, known as the mastery of transformation, provides the practical methodology for consciously altering the ongoing dream of one's life. The primary objective here is to bring harmony and order to the chaotic noise within the mind, the cacophony of internal voices and conflicting desires, enabling the individual to confront their deeply held terrors, transmute those fears, and achieve tangible, lived results. The ultimate prize of this mastery is the profound liberty to author one's own existence, rather than living a life dictated by an external mental parasite or an inherited, unexamined system of beliefs. This profound shift is accomplished by consciously breaking old contracts and independently reprogramming the mind according to one's own deliberate design. The 4 principles serve as a condensed, highly practical summary of how to achieve this mastery of transformation. Successfully navigating the first 2 masteries yields a mind entirely free from parasitic control, clearing the way for the final stage, the mastery of love, occasionally referred to as the mastery of intent. From this ancient perspective, love or intent is the vital life force that drives the continuous, dynamic transformation of all energy. It is the essence of life itself, manifesting as unconditional love. Every single thing in existence is forged from love because all things emanate directly from the divine source. Achieving mastery over love equates to achieving ultimate mastery over the dream of life. And when all 3 disciplines are fully synthesized, the individual reclaims their inherent divinity and merges completely with the Creator. Consequently, every subsequent action taken becomes a pure, unobstructed expression of the singular universal being, which is the ultimate highest aspiration of this path. While further exploration of this final mastery exists in other texts detailing exactly what a love-based dream entails, this state is ultimately a natural, inevitable byproduct of conquering the first 2 masteries, providing a vastly superior, deeply fulfilling method of experiencing existence. However, the focus here must remain firmly anchored on the foundational steps. The first 2 masteries form the core subject and primary exploration of the current work. Before delving into the practical application of the 4 principles, the initial focus must be firmly rooted in cultivating absolute awareness. The crucial question becomes, what precisely must we become aware of? This initial exploration focuses heavily on 3 fundamental realities. First, the genesis of human suffering is found in the inescapable process of domestication, where adults capture a child's attention and instruct them to perceive reality exactly as the surrounding society does. This marks the initial hijacking of human attention, utilizing it to construct the very first, entirely externally dictated dream of a person's life. Second, while humans possess an innate, almost godlike power to create, this immense capability becomes completely locked and invested within our charismatic beliefs. The profound force of our word, which is inextricably linked to our intent, our willpower, our deepest faith, and our capacity to love, becomes ensnared within a highly restrictive, rigid, architectural framework of concepts. This deep entrapment leaves the individual feeling drained, with very little power remaining to alter their lived experience. Third, the natural operation of the human mind is to continuously generate a dream. Yet we have been trained to engage in this profound process without any conscious recognition of what we are doing. The moment an individual recognizes that they are the architect of the dream, they awaken from the trance and reclaim the absolute authority to reshape their reality whenever they choose. The revelation that we possess, the inherent ability to construct an experience of heaven, naturally ignites a profound desire to rewrite the current dream, and the 4 principles serve as the ultimate, perfectly designed instrument for this exact purpose. Moving beyond foundational awareness, there are distinct methodologies for achieving absolute mastery over the art of dreaming. A crucial technique involves learning to consciously direct one's willpower and focus for a second time, allowing the individual to deliberately select what they wish to believe, which crucially encompasses establishing a profound, unwavering belief in oneself. Furthermore, applying these 4 principles fundamentally alters the predictable cycle of actions and their inevitable reactions, recognizing that every choice carries a direct consequence. By consciously changing the initial action, the subsequent result is fundamentally transformed, thereby altering the entire trajectory and dream of one's life. Finally, the practice of alternating between attachment and detachment allows the individual to surrender gracefully to the natural forces of transition, symbolized as the angel of death. This profound acceptance teaches the individual to anchor their existence entirely in the present moment, rather than remaining tethered to the ghosts of the past or anxiously projecting into the unwritten future. Anchoring attention fully in the immediate present profoundly intensifies the experience of joy, resulting in a state of feeling vibrantly and fully alive. While extensive knowledge regarding these masteries is provided, intellectual information alone remains vastly insufficient. Information acts merely as a dormant seed resting within the mind. It is the vital, physical application of action that catalyzes true transformation. Consistent practice of these four principles is the sole requirement for achieving true mastery over them. Through deliberate, countless repetitions, these principles transition from conscious efforts into deeply ingrained, automatic habits, initiating a visible and profound metamorphosis of one's entire life. There exists a beautiful historical metaphor illustrating this concept, describing words as seeds scattered indiscriminately across the land. Some seeds fall upon impenetrable stone and fail to take root, while others land in shallow soil that appears promising on the surface but hides a hardened, unyielding layer beneath. These particular seeds may sprout briefly but quickly wither and perish due to lack of depth. Conversely, seeds that find rich, highly fertile soil grow vigorously into towering, strong trees. The true nature of these trees is revealed entirely by the abundance and quality of the fruit they produce. This imagery perfectly encapsulates the reality of those who actively implement these teachings. It is wonderful to witness how many individuals have cultivated themselves into robust trees, yielding magnificent fruit. One can scarcely imagine the profound implications of living in a society where these four principles were the default habit for every individual, serving as the foundational expression of daily life. Envision a collective humanity committed to the relentless practice of love until absolute mastery is achieved. A reality that is not merely possible, but inevitable. It is merely a question of when this will occur, as the energetic framework for a new paradigm of existence is already established and waiting to be brought forth by humanity. The foundational elements of the universe have already shifted. The illuminating light has fundamentally changed. All that is required now are individuals willing to consciously manifest and dream this new paradigm. By diligently applying these four principles within our own private spheres, we fundamentally alter our individual realities, and soon this new personal dream will organically begin to modify the broader societal dream. There is absolutely no requirement to engage in an active struggle to forcefully modify the external world. Such external change occurs effortlessly and naturally as the direct, unavoidable consequence of our own deep internal metamorphosis. Directing one's focus toward achieving personal liberation is far from a self-serving or selfish act. Rather, it represents the absolute greatest, most profound gift an individual can possibly offer to the entirety of humanity. Domestication. Human suffering begins with domestication. The root of human anguish can be traced directly to a profound process of social conditioning, a systematic taming of the human spirit. As we grow, we actively construct a pristine, unattainable ideal in a desperate bid to be deemed acceptable by those around us, completely unaware that this very pursuit dooms us to inevitable failure. The countless tragedies and internal dramas that define our existence are the direct consequence of this accumulated, internalized programming. Every piece of information we ingest takes on a life of its own. The internal portrait we paint of ourselves becomes an animated entity residing within the architecture of our consciousness. While this fabrication is entirely separate from our true essence, it relentlessly manipulates our perception to ensure its own survival, slowly consuming our joy and vitality in the process. Ancient Toltec wisdom refers to this internal voice of accumulated knowledge as a parasite, while other traditions might label it as an inherent evil. It thrives by feasting upon our positive intentions, our innate faith, and our capacity for happiness. The profound tragedy lies in our complete identification with this imposter. We are convinced that this accumulation of external concepts is our authentic self. In reality, an invisible program is the one directing the course of our existence. This insidious programming, however, was entirely absent at the moment of our birth. In our infancy, the mind existed in a state of pure, unblemished innocence. We possessed absolutely no preconceived notions regarding morality, aesthetics, or societal expectations. We held no conceptual understanding of human identity or gender roles, yet we instinctively recognized our fellow beings. During those formative early years, a child lacks the capacity for self-reflection. The only method available to conceptualize oneself is by observing the reflections provided by the external environment, and the people surrounding us serve as those fundamental mirrors. Caregivers, siblings, and the broader society immediately begin projecting their own subjective interpretations onto the blank canvas of the child's identity. Crucially, these projections are deeply inconsistent. A mother's reflection will differ vastly from a father's, which will further diverge from the messages broadcast by media or religious institutions. We are bombarded with a chaotic array of entirely inaccurate, distorted reflections from mirrors that are fundamentally flawed. Bereft of any independent self-awareness, we simply accept these external verdicts as absolute truth. The moment we offer our agreement, the fabricated identity is permanently etched into our memory, cementing the illusion of who we are. The internal declarations regarding our intelligence, our attractiveness, or our worth are merely the vocalizations of this deeply embedded program. They are nothing more than abstract concepts, completely divorced from our genuine nature. As time progresses, we attempt to synthesize this chaotic barrage of external judgments into a cohesive, projected persona, carefully crafting an outward identity to present to the world, perhaps as an academic achiever or a physical underperformer. Having lost all connection to our innate self-trust, we embark on a desperate, lifelong external search for validation, constantly seeking confirmation of our fabricated, distorted identity. We learn to adopt the judgmental behaviors, the dramatic tendencies, and the interpersonal poisons of the adults around us, seamlessly absorbing their beliefs as our own. This complex interplay of assimilated concepts marks our initiation into the art of dreaming. In the Toltec tradition, this initial capture of our focus by external forces is termed the dream of the first attention, establishing an outward-facing reality where we fruitlessly seek internal qualities like love, justice, and beauty in the external world, oblivious to the fact that these treasures have always resided within us. This dynamic is the absolute genesis of our suffering. Lacking an accurate internal mirror, we embrace the flawed reflections offered by others, losing our authentic essence in a labyrinth of societal expectations. After enduring years of exhausting rebellion and futile attempts to conform to these external demands, we inevitably capitulate. Yet, a quiet, persistent yearning for liberation remains, a subtle inner voice whispering that this constructed persona is fundamentally fraudulent and deeply unfulfilling. We are imprisoned by the very ideas of who we believe we must be. Our entire perception of reality hinges upon this conceptualized, unverified knowledge, which, despite our fervent belief, remains entirely disconnected from truth. The most binding contracts we ever sign are the silent agreements we forge within our own minds, dictating our identity, our emotional parameters, and our permissible behaviors. It requires profound courage to actively examine the distorted reflections we have blindly accepted as truth. We must rigorously interrogate the limitations placed upon us in our youth, questioning the specific dictates assigned to our gender, our capabilities, and our inherent worth by parents, educators, and the wider culture. The objective of this deep introspective process is to unearth and expose any internal agreement that suffocates our innate joy, restricts our loving nature, or dampens our creative fire. By carefully tracing our emotional reactions to these early memories, we can differentiate between the doctrines rooted in fear and those few born of genuine love. This requires a dedicated inventory of the specific messages we received regarding our gender expectations, our physical attributes, and the idealized personality traits we were instructed to embody. We must also catalog the traits we genuinely believe we possess, the qualities we suspect others perceive in us, and the characteristics we desperately long to acquire. This impossible standard, this heavily constructed image of perfection, acts as the primary catalyst for our profound self-rejection and our chronic inability to accept both ourselves and those around us in our natural states. We must vividly describe this phantom ideal, questioning the exact alterations required to achieve it, and honestly assessing whether such an attainment is even within the realm of human possibility, or if it merely serves as a perpetual source of profound discouragement. This insidious standard is indiscriminately applied to our partners, our children, our parents, and our colleagues, ensuring that everyone inevitably falls short of our impossible expectations. The resulting dissonance between our authentic nature and this required performance leaves us feeling deeply fraudulent and exhausted. We construct elaborate social facades to conceal our perceived inadequacies, living in constant terror that our true, unpolished selves will be exposed to the harsh judgments of others. We must bravely envision the consequences of shedding these heavy masks and the liberating reality of expressing our unvarnished truth. Following our conditioning, the struggle ceases to be about pleasing the external world. The conflict becomes entirely internal, a continuous war against our own inability to embody our personalized myth of perfection. We must locate our current position on a spectrum ranging from total subjugation to these distorted images to complete alignment with our authentic essence. By consciously drafting new self-honoring contracts, we take the initial vital steps toward honoring our genuine nature. Whatever directives reside within this internalized codex are accepted as absolute, unquestionable reality. We filter every single judgment through this rigid framework, even when its rulings viciously contradict our most fundamental natural instincts. Consider the ancient Christian allegory of the garden, a state of paradisiacal existence free from internal parasitic control, where humanity perceived the world purely through unclouded awareness, rather than accumulated knowledge. The metaphorical tree at the center of this paradise housed an entity that can be understood not merely as a mythical serpent, but as a deeply insidious intellectual parasite. Consuming the fruit of this tree equates to ingesting corrupted information, allowing a destructive viral program to infiltrate the pristine landscape of the mind. Humanity hoards vast reservoirs of information, the overwhelming majority of which is demonstrably false. Rather than utilizing this accumulated data as a neutral instrument for interaction, we become completely subjugated by it, granting it autonomous life and allowing it to generate endless cycles of unnecessary trauma. Historical examples, such as the once universal belief in a flat Earth, demonstrate how collective conviction can legitimize blatant falsehoods. While some misconceptions are relatively benign, others possess a highly lethal capacity to dictate and destroy human lives. During our vulnerable formative years, we exerted no conscious choice over the moral paradigms or religious structures we absorbed. The external societal dream simply hijacked our attention, depositing these concepts directly into our memory banks through the authority of our elders and institutions. This unsolicited installation ensures our lifelong servitude to the collective illusion, while the concepts themselves hold no inherent moral weight. The animating force behind them, the viral parasite, is actively malignant. Once this program assumes command, the authentic self is effectively silenced, replaced by a self-destructive proxy that continually acts against our own best interests. We consume this toxic programming, internalize the parasite, and succumb to a profound psychological sickness. Recognizing this systemic mental illness provides the crucial key to understanding the pervasive violence, inequity, and profound sorrow that characterize human societies. The emotional infernos that drive us toward addictive behaviors, rigid dogmatism, and interpersonal warfare are the direct, unavoidable symptoms of this ingested ideological poison. The path to healing requires a psychological purgation. Just as the physical body expels contaminated food to restore health, the mind must actively and violently reject the harmful concepts it has swallowed. Removing this viral entity is the only way to restore the mind's optimal functionality. Across various global traditions, the ultimate conclusion remains identical. The prevailing collective hallucination of society is entirely devoid of truth. Awakening from this shared delusion allows one to observe the rampant parasitic infection in others, recognizing the constant spewing of emotional toxicity. This heightened perspective reveals that all humans are trapped in identical cycles of reactionary fear, anger, and sorrow, functioning merely as mirrors reflecting our own internal conflicts, an observation that requires deep comprehension rather than moralistic judgment. Cultivating this profound recognition is the essence of the first great mastery. It demands opening one's eyes to reality, refusing to remain willfully blind, and cutting through the dense, accumulated fog of false data that actively prevents us from perceiving the world as it truly exists. The ultimate challenge is to sustain this clear vision amidst the pervasive haze, systematically dismantling the false structures until the mist fully lifts. Consistent practice of this clarity possesses the power to fundamentally alter our entire lived experience, granting us almost total command over the narrative of our lives. This internal dynamic is perfectly mirrored in historical tragedies where weaponized ideology, wielded by figures of authority and fueled by mass hysteria, resulted in the senseless persecution and execution of the innocent. The true evil in such scenarios never resided within the victims, but entirely within the unquestioned texts and the individuals who blindly enforced their dictates. We harbor an identical, tyrannical ledger within our own minds, utilizing it continuously to convict, sentence, and brutalize ourselves, frequently denying our most basic right to a joyful existence. The mind is infested with these conceptual parasites which aggregate into a massive, dominating force sustained solely by our continued intellectual consent. The deeply ingrained conviction of our own inadequacy is merely one of these malignant entities, systematically destroying our potential by limiting our happiness and creative output. Beliefs surrounding our unlovability or our desperate need to always be correct are equally fraudulent and self-annihilating. The compulsion to be right, for instance, necessitates the vilification of others, creating external enemies that inevitably return to inflict further harm. These concepts possess a perverse vitality, demanding our emotional energy and our steadfast belief to survive. They are the modern equivalents of ancient demons, battling for absolute supremacy over the landscape of our consciousness. Our mind resembles a chaotic democracy populated by millions of conflicting voices, ultimately governed by whichever ideological faction manages to seize majority control, dictating our behavior according to a highly rigid, internalized legal code. Every event we experience is rigidly interpreted through this unforgiving lens. Alongside this strict code, two distinct internal archetypes take up permanent residence within the psyche. The first is a relentless magistrate, executing its duties with terrifying precision, utilizing the internal rulebook to evaluate and condemn every conceivable action, thought, and emotion. The counterpart to this tyrant is the recipient of these endless sentences, a profoundly wounded aspect of the self that shoulders the crushing burden of shame, blame, and inadequacy. Whether this fractured aspect receives a rare commendation or more commonly a severe reprimand depends entirely on its strict adherence to the internalized dogmas. Neither of these internal entities ever questions the absolute validity of the rulebook. They enforce its dictates with terrifying, unwavering faith. Yet, an honest examination of this internal justice system reveals a complete absence of actual fairness or equity. The entirety of our personal agony stems directly from our blind allegiance to this fraudulent text, a document utterly devoid of fundamental truth. Despite its demonstrable falsehoods, to these internal actors, its authority remains absolute. To dismantle this architecture, one must engage in the meticulous, ongoing documentation of these subconscious contracts, becoming acutely aware of the specific rules governing one's relationship to the physical body, social interactions, spiritual concepts, and professional ambitions. The internal magistrate scrutinizes the minutiae of our existence, creating an environment of perpetual tyranny. We must clearly identify our judgments regarding both ourselves and others, recognizing the deeply flawed assumption that the external world assesses us using our own personalized, distorted criteria. We brutally penalize ourselves for past errors and eagerly inflict similar punishments upon those around us. When this critical voice inevitably arises, it must be met with profound apathy. One must learn to dismiss its severe proclamations with simple, disarming questions, ultimately realizing that its desperate demands for perfection simply do not matter. Meanwhile, the wounded aspect of the psyche languishes in feelings of profound helplessness and unworthiness, a direct result of accepting these abusive judgments as fact. It is vital to recognize that any belief generating fear or reinforcing a sense of inferiority is an absolute fabrication. The authentic self operates exclusively from a paradigm of love and would never engage in such self-mutilation. We must envision the extraordinary liberation that awaits when we revoke the authority granted to these internal abusers and step out from beneath their shadow. The parasite will inevitably mount a fierce resistance, presenting seemingly logical excuses for its continued necessity, arguing that chaos and laziness would reign without its harsh discipline. These protests must be systematically dismantled and replaced with rational, loving truths, allowing the individual to gradually reclaim their usurped power and completely transition their faith away from the internal tyrant and toward their own boundless potential. Contracts forged in fear drain our vitality, whereas agreements built upon love actively conserve and generate vital energy. The ultimate task involves a methodical, relentless campaign to identify, isolate, and completely shatter these limiting beliefs, replacing them one by one with new, empowering agreements rooted deeply in self-respect until the entire structure of internal suffering is utterly eradicated. Tutu wi ton sein, wit osu sin chanton sun, ochiko kwatu stam I wutu what is sun. The power of the word. Humans are creators, but our power of creation is invested in our beliefs. The capacity to articulate thoughts through language is not merely a mechanism for basic communication. It is the fundamental instrument of human creation. Regardless of the specific dialect spoken, the words we choose are the direct vehicles for our deepest intentions, our willpower, and our faith. This concept echoes ancient spiritual texts, which proclaim that the universe itself was birthed from a singular, divine utterance. The word is the mechanism through which light and form are woven into existence, acting as a profound manifestation of the life force itself. When we speak, we are actively wielding a powerful magic, casting spells that directly shape our lived reality. Central to this creative power is the concept of faith. True mastery over one's life requires the mastery of faith, for faith is the absolute, undivided focus of our intent. When a person harbors an unwavering belief devoid of any paralyzing doubt, their word achieves a state of absolute impeccability. The most influential figures throughout human history have possessed this immense personal power, driven by a faith that emanates from profound love and deep wisdom. Conversely, faith that is generated by the intellect, rooted in fear and unexamined dogmas, mutates into a blind fanaticism that fuels division and conflict, compelling individuals to forcefully impose their views onto others in a desperate bid for psychological safety. We are inherently powerful architects of reality, born equipped with a limitless reservoir of this creative faith. However, a tragic misallocation of this resource occurs as we mature. We unknowingly pour the entirety of our vital energy into constructing and fortifying a vast, intricate architecture of inherited beliefs. Imagine each accepted concept as a heavy brick, cemented firmly into place by the sheer force of our conviction, our faith becomes deeply imprisoned within this rigid structure, leaving us severely depleted of the necessary power to enact meaningful change in our lives. Because we have invested our belief so entirely in this edifice, our perception warps to ensure that every experience validates our preconceived notions. The external world simply becomes a mirror, dutifully reflecting the internal, heavily fortified dream. Throughout our conditioning, we meticulously construct a highly specific definition of our identity. Every concept regarding our gender, our capabilities, and our societal role is cemented into a deeply restrictive box that we perceive as our inescapable reality. We trap our boundless creative potential within this tiny enclosure, sealing it shut with the absolute authority of our own conviction. When we firmly declare our inability to achieve a certain goal, our captive faith immediately rushes to fulfill that prophecy, guaranteeing our failure. Every single agreement we have made requires a continuous expenditure of our vital energy to remain active. This explains the profound difficulty we face when attempting to break destructive habits such as an addiction. The rational intellect may clearly perceive the harm and dictate a cessation of the behavior, yet the individual finds themselves hopelessly overpowered by the compulsion. The will is simply too weak to enforce the new directive. The energy required to shatter an old agreement must be equal to or greater than the energy originally used to forge it. Unfortunately, the vast majority of our life force is actively consumed by the exhausting task of sustaining our sprawling network of deeply flawed beliefs. Our energy is continuously drained by the dramatic emotional reactions triggered by fear, the frantic defense of our subjective opinions, and the desperate, lifelong pursuit of external validation. The cacophony of conflicting internal demands entirely dissipates our creative power, leaving us feeling profoundly helpless and victimized by our own lives. However, recognizing the rigid, brick-like nature of this belief system provides the key to our liberation. By consciously withdrawing our faith from one small agreement at a time, we begin to extract the structural supports of this internal prison. As we systematically dismantle these agreements, the grand architecture eventually destabilizes and collapses. This profound deconstruction shatters the limited, tightly defined identity we have clung to for so long. The immediate aftermath of losing this rigid human form is a period of intense internal chaos as the familiar dictatorial order of our past conditioning dissolves. Long-suppressed emotional toxins rise to the surface, presenting a profound, albeit difficult opportunity for deep psychological cleansing. This turbulent void is incredibly fertile ground, offering the unprecedented chance to draft a completely new, intentionally chosen set of rules for our existence. Naturally, we experience profound resistance to this dissolution. We have spent decades mastering our social masks and forming deep, comforting attachments to our perceived limitations. Letting go of these familiar, albeit painful identities can cause significant emotional distress as the internalized judge and the chronic victim fiercely attempt to maintain their dominion. True transformation is rarely instantaneous. It requires a gradual, courageous unlearning of everything we hold to be absolutely true. As we shed the burden of these restrictive definitions, we transcend the conventional boundaries of what it means to be human. We discover a profound equality with all elements of the universe, realizing that we are woven from the identical light that animates the stars and the stones. In this state of profound interconnectedness, the frantic pursuit of personal importance and superiority simply evaporates. The journey involves focusing our newly liberated attention on dismantling the smallest, least fortified agreements first. With each minor victory, the captured energy is returned to us, steadily increasing our personal power until we possess the formidable strength necessary to confront and conquer the most deeply entrenched demons of our psyche. To actively participate in this transformation, one must deeply contemplate the sheer physical force of language. A word is never passive. It is a resonant frequency that actively seeks to manifest its physical equivalent. It functions exactly like a dormant seed carrying the absolute potential to sprout an entire forest of similar vibrations within the landscape of the mind. We must reflect upon the specific linguistic seeds planted within us during our vulnerable youth and recognize the individuals who functioned as dark magicians, casting long-lasting spells over our self-perception through their careless or malicious speech. By observing the distinct emotional resonance of different words, we can begin to curate our internal vocabulary, recognizing that language operates on the principle of attraction. Toxic input guarantees toxic output, while words steeped in truth and affection yield a harvest of the same. This vigilance must extend to the casual, everyday phrases and cultural idioms we repeat without a second thought. Expressions that playfully invoke death, exhaustion, or physical pain are not harmless colloquialisms. They are active declarations that reinforce destructive patterns within the subconscious. We curse ourselves and those around us in moments of minor frustration, blindly scattering toxic seeds. True impeccability requires a relentless audit of these habitual utterances. Furthermore, this linguistic hygiene is the absolute foundation of self-love, which is inextricably linked to fundamental self-respect. We must examine the internal monologue we engage in while looking in the mirror or moving through our day. If we would never speak to a beloved companion or a cherished animal with the cruelty we reserve for ourselves, we must immediately revoke our agreement to endure such internal abuse. Every critical thought must be consciously intercepted, forgiven, and deliberately replaced with declarations of profound self-acceptance. We must also recognize the catastrophic impact of participating in gossip, which operates as a highly contagious form of emotional venom. Engaging in these exchanges, whether discussing ourselves or others, perpetuates a cycle of fear and actively degrades the fabric of our relationships. We must analyze our motivations for indulging in this dark magic, acknowledge the needless suffering it generates, and develop concrete strategies to exit these conversations or steer them toward positivity. Breaking the addiction to gossip requires immense discipline, transitioning gradually from days to weeks to months of abstention until a new habit of truthful, constructive communication is firmly established. Concurrently, we must relinquish the exhausting, ego-driven compulsion to constantly defend our subjective opinions. The desperate need to be proven right inevitably necessitates making someone else wrong, a dynamic that inherently breeds conflict and drains our vital reserves. By observing the relational destruction caused by this defensive posturing, we can commit to extended periods of simply allowing others their perspectives without interjection or correction. To anchor this profound shift in our relationship with language, we must consciously direct our energy entirely toward truth and affection. Selecting a tangible physical symbol serves as a powerful daily reminder of this commitment. One might choose a simple seed to represent the fertile potential of speech, a depiction of a double-edged sword illustrating the power to either liberate or destroy, a dual-colored stone reflecting the choice between dark and light magic, or a musical note symbolizing the vibrational quality of our utterances. Placing this chosen object in a prominent location reinforces the intention. Finally, this process culminates in the drafting of a solemn, formal declaration, a binding personal contract to govern one's speech with absolute integrity. By signing this internal treaty, we take absolute responsibility for our own liberation, vowing to honor the self, select our words with meticulous care, and utilize our immense creative power exclusively to cultivate a localized personal experience of heaven. 3. Dreaming. The function of the human mind is to dream, but we have learned to dream without awareness. From a certain philosophical vantage point, the entirety of human existence is fundamentally a continuous state of dreaming. This phenomenon occurs not just in the depths of slumber, but actively, while the physical brain is wide awake. To grasp this profound concept, envision a flawless mirror that perfectly captures the external world. The images it holds are merely virtual, untouchable illusions. The human eye functions in a remarkably similar manner. The light that enters the retina acts as a receptive mirror, but the complex nervous system behind it interprets this incoming light to construct a vivid, internal, virtual reality that we inherently accept as absolute, tangible truth. This internal projection, crafted entirely from the interpretation of light, constitutes the ongoing dream of our lives. Light serves as the ultimate messenger of existence, carrying the infinite potential and structural blueprints for all material forms, while light constructs the external framework of reality across all elements of nature. It also illuminates the internal theater of the mind. During sleep, this internal theater lacks the rigid framework of the waking world, allowing the dreamscape to shift instantaneously based on our wandering focus, making the impossible suddenly achievable. However, when awake, our reasoning intellect imposes a strict order upon this creation, fabricating the concepts of time and space to justify the continuity of the experience. This reasoning process is simply the act of dreaming, with the addition of language and logic. The reality, however, is that time and space are mere mental constructs utilized to validate the internal narrative. The only true reality is the eternal unfolding present. Ancient practitioners sometimes utilized psychoactive substances to temporarily disrupt the brain's rigid processing, revealing the fragmented nature of perception and proving that the mind is essentially running a continuous simulation. Yet, such drastic measures are completely unnecessary to grasp this truth. We exist within a vast sea of billions of fellow humans, the vast majority of whom are entirely oblivious to the fact that they are actively hallucinating their reality. These individual visions interweave and overlap to form a massive, collective hallucination known as the dream of society. When an individual finally recognizes the illusory nature of their waking life, a profound shift occurs. The realization that reality is as malleable as light itself grants the dreamer the extraordinary power to consciously alter their deeply held convictions. The heavy burdens and anxieties of daily life lose their solid grip, recognized simply as shifting shadows within the mind. Recognizing that everyone is locked within their own isolated, subjective hallucination fundamentally alters all interpersonal dynamics. The opinions and harsh judgments of others lose their sting because they are recognized as mere projections of a separate, independent dream, completely disconnected from one's own internal truth. The desperate compulsion to defend oneself against these external verdicts simply evaporates. Furthermore, the deeply ingrained habit of making assumptions dissolves entirely. How can one assume anything when the fundamental nature of the dream and the dreamer is in a state of constant, unpredictable flux? We learn to either accept people exactly as they are in their ever-changing state or gracefully step away, completely detached from any desired outcome. Before this awakening, our interactions are heavily dictated by a rigid, internalized rulebook, which demands constant assumption-making and emotional reactivity. Once liberated from this text, human interaction becomes an experience of profound magic and clarity. The only reliable compass remaining in this awakened state is one's own fundamental integrity, the uncorrupted essence of the authentic self. Those still trapped by their internal conditioning experience a continuous lack of integrity through constant self-rejection, emotional turmoil, and the generation of interpersonal poison. True integrity is restored only when we align our speech and intent with our highest truth, refusing to betray ourselves to satisfy the demands of the internalized tyrant. Without the heavy burden of this internalized rulebook, concepts like guilt, shame, and societal expectations lose their manipulative power over our psyche. We no longer seek external validation because we recognize that such approval merely reflects another person's conditioned rules. Trust in oneself becomes absolute. This internal harmony is the truest indicator of reclaimed integrity, manifesting as a deep, abiding sense of joy and peace. The four guiding principles serve as the ultimate tools for achieving this state, providing immunity from the collective hallucination and empowering the individual to actively sculpt their own reality. By cultivating this profound awareness, the dreamer transitions from a passive participant in a nightmare to a masterful artist, capable of forging a lived experience of unparalleled beauty. Practice idea for mastering awareness: your authentic self. The journey of awakening ultimately leads back to the core of one's being, the absolute totality of the genuine self. Reclaiming this state requires dedicating focused moments each day to consciously reconnect with the profound truth of one's origin. One must deeply contemplate the reality that they are woven from the very fabric of divine light, the ultimate carrier of infinite potential and universal knowledge. In recognizing oneself as an expression of pure, unadulterated spirit, the frantic need to strive, conform, or pretend completely vanishes. There is absolutely no requirement to do or be anything other than this radiant, fundamental truth. By actively anchoring oneself in the memory of this authentic nature, the artificial boundaries of the lived experience dissolve, revealing a life of absolute, boundless possibility. Voorzien het innoção dan isinswoyantia nei prompreinsos iets. The second attention, using your will and attention for the second time. During our initial exposure to the world, our attention is captured and utilized for the very first time. In this state of profound innocence, we are systematically conditioned to perceive reality entirely according to the collective hallucination of society. In this formative stage, we possess absolutely no genuine choice. Our focus is seized by external forces, parents, educators, society at large, who diligently implant their own deeply held convictions into our developing minds. The faculty of attention is simply the mind's ability to isolate and concentrate on a specific aspect of perception, and wherever that focus lands, our personal lived reality is subsequently forged. Because our initial programming was dictated entirely by external agents, our responses to life become highly automated. We function essentially as biological machines. An external event pushes a specific button, and our internal programming automatically executes a predetermined emotional or physical reaction. The illusion of human free will is pervasive, yet highly inaccurate when viewed through this lens. In our conditioned state, our willpower is entirely subjugated by the broader societal dream, and we unconsciously execute the dictates of our external conditioning. If true free will were active within us, it defies logic that we would ever consciously choose to experience anger, sorrow, or the heavy burden of victimhood. We would never deliberately inflict harm upon ourselves or those we deeply love. The undeniable reality of our continuous psychological suffering stands as ultimate proof that our capacity for free choice has been severely compromised. The path to true liberation, therefore, requires a profound internal shift, a process recognized in ancient traditions as cultivating the second attention. Engaging this second attention involves consciously reclaiming the power of our focus, utilizing it deliberately for the second time, but now directed entirely from within. This marks the beginning of a magnificent metamorphosis, allowing us to escape the tyrannical grip of the societal hallucination and actively author a new, entirely personal reality characterized by peace and profound joy. The crucial distinction in this secondary phase of dreaming is the total absence of our former innocence. We are now fully aware and capable of deliberately selecting precisely what we choose to believe, which vitally includes cultivating a profound, unwavering belief in our own inherent worth. By turning our awareness inward during the course of our everyday lives, we systematically overwrite our restrictive programming. We assume absolute responsibility for our convictions, ensuring that every new contract we forge with ourselves actively nourishes our vitality, liberty, and capacity for love, while ruthlessly severing ties with any doctrine rooted in falsehood or fear. To master this internal reality, one must deeply understand the mechanics of attention. Consider the simple act of hearing one's name called out in a crowded room. The external sound attempts to snag your focus. You possess the power to briefly turn, assess the situation, and then consciously decide whether the interaction warrants your continued energetic investment. If the engagement does not align with your internal harmony or chosen reality, you can immediately withdraw your focus, allowing the external noise to fade into irrelevance. This deliberate unhooking ensures that you remain firmly anchored in the present moment, rather than being dragged into the chaotic emotional dramas constantly manufactured by the unawakened world around you. Conversely, when an endeavor genuinely resonates with your authentic nature, you can choose to pour the totality of your attention into it, operating from a place of deep desire and joyous participation rather than heavy obligation. The surrounding world, heavily invested in its own suffering, will relentlessly attempt to capture your focus. A primary mechanism for this capture is the exchange of toxic gossip, where individuals seek to discharge their internal venom by demanding the attention of another. Human interactions frequently devolve into unconscious battles for energetic supremacy, a desperate competition to control the focus of those around us. When the external world inevitably manages to breach your defenses and snag your attention, the mastery lies in recognizing the intrusion immediately and disengaging your focus as rapidly as possible, thereby preserving your conscious awareness. If someone hurls an insult and your emotional body reacts with pain, it signifies that their words have landed upon an unhealed internal wound. Their judgment has merely illuminated a toxic belief you still secretly harbor about yourself. By utilizing the second attention, you can observe this painful reaction objectively, consciously withdraw your faith from the destructive belief, and instantly initiate your own psychological healing. Every person who triggers your emotional defenses serves as an invaluable, illuminating mirror, revealing the hidden shadows of your own conditioning and providing the exact coordinates for where your internal liberation work must be applied. Practice idea for mastering transformation. The dream of the second attention. The deliberate application of your reclaimed focus is the mechanism by which your internal landscape is fundamentally redesigned. By consciously directing your attention toward the specific mental contracts that currently generate your suffering, you initiate the powerful process of drafting a new paradigm of existence. This deliberate, highly conscious act of creation is the very essence of utilizing your focus for the second time. It requires a deep, unflinching inventory of the specific rules currently governing your self-perception, your relationships, your spiritual connection, and your interactions with the material world. In this newly authored reality, you unequivocally grant yourself absolute permission to experience profound joy, to express your unique creative essence without apology, and to embrace the complete truth of your authentic nature. This transformative work demands precise identification of the psychological mechanisms currently generating your distress. When faced with a challenging life scenario or a wave of negative emotion, the practitioner must pause and methodically trace the feeling back to its origin. You must identify the specific actions and choices that preceded the emotional pain and, more importantly, unearth the silent, underlying beliefs that authorized those self-destructive actions in the first place. If a behavior yields guilt or shame, it fundamentally violates your true nature, regardless of its target. The objective is to rigorously dismantle these deeply ingrained, harmful contracts and deliberately replace them with alternative agreements constructed entirely upon a foundation of self-respect and truth, thereby fundamentally altering the inevitable reactions they produce. Declare a war against the parasite. Choosing to embody these new principles is tantamount to issuing a formal declaration of independence against the internal tyrant that has long governed your psyche. The internalized judge, the perpetual victim, and the heavy ledger of false laws constitute a parasitic entity draining your vital life force. The path to liberation requires a conscious, militant commitment to reclaim absolute sovereignty over your own mind and physical vessel. You must officially declare your intention to seize the architectural blueprints of your existence, vowing to deliberately design a life characterized by profound beauty and freedom, rather than passively enduring the nightmare dictated by your past conditioning. Tools for transformation. The architectural structure of our current suffering was built brick by brick through the power of relentless repetition. Therefore, the dismantling of this structure and the erection of a new paradigm demands the exact same continuous application of force. The metamorphosis is facilitated through a specific, unwavering discipline. First, an absolute, unyielding intention must be set. A conscious commitment to alter a specific harmful dynamic must be firmly established. Second, the practitioner must fiercely guard their attention, recognizing that the external hallucination will continuously attempt to distract and derail this internal focus. Third, deliberate, decisive action must be taken. Philosophical contemplation without physical implementation yields absolutely no tangible change. Finally, this new action must be repeated with unwavering consistency until the new, life-affirming response becomes the deeply ingrained automatic default of your entire being. Heaven on earth. The concepts of ultimate reward and punishment are not distant afterlife destinations, but immediate, psychological realities existing entirely within the landscape of the human mind. A state of paradise is entirely achievable while still drawing breath. It is a localized, personal experience of profound liberty, unobstructed love, and the uninhibited expression of one's genuine essence. To manifest this reality, the practitioner must actively engage their imagination, rendering this idealized state in vivid, meticulous detail. One must deeply investigate what activities, environments, and interactions provoke the most profound sensations of joy and spiritual elevation, using these insights as the foundational architecture for their new waking dream. The Last Judgment. A profound exercise in liberation involves vividly imagining that today marks the absolute final cessation of all internal and external condemnation. Envision a reality where the crushing weight of self-criticism simply evaporates and the compulsion to evaluate and condemn the actions of others is permanently extinguished. Picture a mind perfectly still, completely devoid of the relentless, dictatorial voice of accumulated false knowledge. In this state of profound silence, the intellect no longer attempts to forcefully mandate identity, allowing the individual to navigate existence guided solely by the profound, intuitive wisdom of the heart. The task is to vividly capture and sustain the sublime feeling of this unburdened existence, recognizing that this pure, unjudged expression of self is the absolute genesis of a fundamentally new and beautiful reality. Tantais sipmasansos maivayisara wikspias b ifki yisbi. Action-reaction, using the 4 agreements to change your actions-reactions. Those who achieve true mastery over their existence function as deliberate architects, fully cognizant that every single choice generates an inevitable consequence. The fundamental law of action and reaction governs the entirety of our lived experience. A profound tragedy of human behavior is our tendency to endlessly repeat the exact same actions while desperately hoping for a different, less painful outcome. When we encounter persistent dissatisfaction or recurring trauma, the sole path to a different reality requires altering the initial choice. This demands acute awareness. We must learn to step back from the immediate distress and meticulously trace the sequence of events backward until we locate the precise action or decision that set the unwanted reaction into motion. Once this initial misstep is identified, true transformation involves forgiving the resulting reaction, courageously selecting a different path, and closely observing the new outcome. If the new result remains unsatisfactory, the process must be repeated until the desired harmony is achieved. While absolute control over the external world remains an illusion, absolute sovereignty over our internal reactions is entirely within our grasp. It is not the external circumstance that dictates our joy or sorrow, but entirely our chosen response to it. Consider a monumental error committed a decade ago. Society and your internal magistrate may have handed down a severe condemnation at the time, yet does a single misstep necessitate a lifetime sentence of emotional agony? The enduring shame, guilt, and shattered self-worth that linger years later are not actually the direct result of the past event. They are the immediate consequence of a self-judgment that occurred mere moments ago. The mind uses the distant memory as a convenient justification, but the suffering is actively generated in the present moment by the conscious act of self-rejection. The internal tyrant issues the ruling, the victim accepts the punishment, and the cycle of suffering is instantly renewed through our own unwavering belief in our inherent unworthiness. This is precisely where the four guiding principles become profound instruments of intervention. When the memory of a past failing arises, rather than reflexively deploying the word as a weapon of self-destruction, one must choose absolute impeccability. In that crucial moment, the new action becomes a declaration of profound self-forgiveness. Immediately, the corresponding reaction transforms from despair to peace. This is the essence of logic and applied wisdom. Furthermore, one must refuse to take the lingering judgments of others personally, recognizing that their condemnation exists solely within the boundaries of their own subjective dream. We must also relinquish the paralyzing assumption that the rest of the world continues to harbor resentment or even remembers the transgression. Finally, achieving this shift requires the active physical and mental effort of doing one's utmost in the present moment. True action is not merely a theoretical desire to change. It is the physical implementation of these principles in the face of ingrained habits. The architecture of this transformation rests on three pillars: absolute awareness of the suffering, laser-focused attention on the preceding action, and the deliberate application of the four principles to alter the subsequent reaction. Our choices must be continually calibrated against our internal integrity, measuring whether a decision emanates from a foundation of love and joy, or from a place of fear and sorrow. The greatest obstacle to this practice is our pervasive lack of awareness, an ignorance heavily reinforced by our lifelong conditioning. To reclaim this clarity, we must systematically revoke our allegiance to the false doctrines of our internal ledger. A destructive agreement cannot simply be abandoned into a void. It must be actively replaced with a life-affirming counterpart. The vital energy previously squandered on sustaining a painful belief must be entirely redirected into the new, empowering contract until it permanently takes root. Through relentless repetition, destructive emotional responses, such as habitual anger, were originally formed. Anger, frequently masking deep-seated terror, may have once served to create a protective distance from a perceived threat. Over time, this isolated reaction solidified into an automatic defense mechanism, an ingrained contract dictating that safety requires hostility. The original catalyst for the fear is often entirely forgotten, leaving behind only the isolating, toxic habit. The profound challenge lies in interrupting this deeply grooved neural pathway. We must utilize our reclaimed awareness to observe the rising emotion, interrupt the automated response, and consciously select a different interaction. As these new, empowering choices are repeated, they gradually replace the old programming, initiating a rapid and profound elevation of our entire lived experience. Practice. Idea for mastering transformation: awareness, attention, action, reaction. The implementation of these four principles requires a formidable force of will. However, the consistent, dedicated application of these tenets promises an extraordinary metamorphosis, effectively banishing the pervasive nightmare of emotional torment from one's immediate reality and replacing it with a self-authored paradigm of peace. Direct your own drama. To cultivate this transformative objectivity, one must learn to view recent, emotionally charged events from a posture of profound detachment. Imagine extracting yourself from the chaotic center of a painful memory and elevating your perspective to that of a theatrical director observing a stage play from a high balcony. From this elevated, emotionally distanced vantage point, the chaotic tangle of interactions becomes starkly clear. You can objectively identify the ensemble of characters, pinpointing the specific actor who initiated the conflict and observing the cascading chain of reactions that followed. More importantly, this perspective illuminates your own specific role within the narrative. From the balcony, you must ruthlessly analyze your own performance. Did you utilize your language with absolute integrity, or did you wield it to inflict harm or self-deprecate? Did you absorb the actions of the other characters as a direct assault on your identity, or did you recognize their behavior as a manifestation of their own internal struggles? Did you fabricate intricate assumptions regarding their motives? Or did you seek absolute clarity through inquiry? Ultimately, did you execute your role to the absolute highest standard possible in that specific moment? The true power of this exercise lies in the imaginative restructuring of the scene. The director must envision how the narrative arc would have fundamentally altered had they operated strictly within the parameters of the four principles. How would absolute impeccability have shifted the dialogue? How would the absence of personal offense have diffused the rising tension? Furthermore, one must consider the hypothetical transformation if all actors on the stage had adhered to these same enlightened tenets. This mental rehearsal is not an exercise in regret, but a profound training ground for future encounters. By continually envisioning these empowered outcomes, the practitioner arms themselves with the necessary tools to interrupt future dramas before they can fully manifest, systematically rewriting the script of their existence from one of perpetual conflict to one of enduring peace. 6. Attach, detach, surrendering to the angel of death. The internal parasite thrives on the heavy burden of history, constantly demanding that we drag the weight of the past into our current existence. This relentless focus backward makes the simple act of living profoundly exhausting. When our consciousness is tethered to what has already occurred, the vibrant reality of the present moment becomes entirely obscured. If one observes the natural world, a fundamental truth becomes glaringly apparent. Existence is defined by eternal, ceaseless transformation. From the cosmos to the smallest particle, the entirety of creation is in a state of perpetual flux. Energy is in continuous motion, propelled by the magnificent force of life itself. The exact same vital energy that gently forces a blossom to open is the identical current that slowly ages the human physical vessel. While the overarching collective hallucination of society and the dense matter of the physical world may appear static, they are merely transforming at a pace too slow for the naked eye to immediately perceive. The buildings we inhabit, the mountains dotting the horizon, and the forests breathing life into the air are all gradually shifting in continuous reaction to the passage of life. The personal dream, the intricate dance between our consciousness and our perceived reality, is equally fluid. However, within the secure, enclosed architecture of our internal virtual reality, the mind fiercely resists this natural metamorphosis. Humanity possesses a deep-seated terror of change, desperately attempting to freeze the dynamic flow of existence. We form ironclad attachments to specific iterations of our dream, standing in direct opposition to the fundamental laws of nature. It is precisely this futile resistance to transformation that generates our profound emotional agony. By refusing to accept that all things must eventually transition, we inadvertently manufacture the devastating illusion of death, dooming ourselves to experience the excruciating pain of loss repeatedly. Because humans possess an incredibly robust capacity for memory, we become fiercely attached to deceased moments, utilizing our creative power to continually resurrect them within the theater of our minds. We project these heavily distorted, highly subjective memories onto our internal screen, replaying the agonizing movies of our past traumas, failed relationships, and youthful conditioning long after the physical events have evaporated. True existence is located exclusively in what is actively unfolding right now. Death is simply that which is no longer happening. The narrative of our childhood, the dynamics of our past romances, the person we were 30 years ago, all of these elements are entirely deceased. Yet we insist on carrying these phantom corpses with us, allowing them to dictate the emotional tenor of our immediate reality. The ancient Toltec metaphor introduces the angel of death, a constant companion walking beside us, whose divine purpose is to eventually reclaim every single thing we believe we possess, including the physical body itself. Absolute surrender to this entity is the highest form of wisdom. It requires the profound recognition that nothing is truly ours to permanently hoard. However, the exquisite balance of this universal law dictates that for every single element the angel of death removes from our grasp. The boundless force of life immediately provides a new, breathtaking gift. If our hands remain tightly clenched around what has already been taken, we are utterly incapable of receiving the new treasures being offered. This profound surrender is synonymous with the practice of detachment. Detachment is frequently misunderstood as a cold, unfeeling withdrawal from affection. In truth, it is the ultimate expression of respect for the unstoppable currents of nature. We are inherently designed to navigate these currents gracefully. A small child exists purely in the immediate now, blissfully unconcerned with the ghosts of yesterday or the anxieties of tomorrow. A child will engage with a toy with total, consuming passion, yet when the moment passes, the object is abandoned without a second thought, the child's focus seamlessly shifting to the next fascinating encounter. It is only through the grueling process of social conditioning that we are forcefully taught to hoard our experiences and dread the future. To reclaim this natural state, one must master the rhythm of attaching and detaching. When a beautiful experience, a profound relationship, or a meaningful endeavor enters your sphere, you must attach to it completely, savoring its essence with the absolute maximum intensity your spirit can muster. Yet, the instant the natural lifespan of that encounter concludes, you must gracefully detach, allowing it to recede into the past without clinging. By practicing this conscious release, you prevent the accumulation of energetic baggage, ensuring that your vital focus remains fiercely anchored in the present. Consider the profound love one might feel for a partner. The moment that love mutates into a desperate desire for ownership, the suffering begins. True detachment honors the absolute freedom of the beloved. When, in their presence, one drinks in their beauty entirely. When they depart, the attachment is severed, eliminating the agony of their absence and respecting their sovereign right to move freely through the world. This rhythmic practice applies to material wealth, professional ambitions, and most critically, to the vast reservoir of our accumulated knowledge. Humanity is terrifyingly attached to its own beliefs. We cling desperately to the specific limiting definitions of our identity, the rigid human form we constructed in our youth, even when this identity guarantees a life of misery. The familiar pain of our jealousies, our rages, and our chronic victimhood provides a perverse sense of psychological security. Releasing these familiar demons induces profound anxiety because it requires stepping into the absolute unknown. Yet, true transformation demands that we relinquish these heavy, rotting corpses of false knowledge. When a higher truth presents itself, we must possess the courage to detach from the outdated doctrine, allowing the new, liberating paradigm to completely reshape our existence. Practice idea for mastering transformation. Attach, detach. The lingering echoes of your internal tyrant will undoubtedly surface, but the entity itself will have lost its power. To accelerate this dissolution, one must undertake a rigorous inventory of every single element to which a fierce attachment is held. This encompasses physical possessions, specific individuals, familiar emotional states, and deeply entrenched ideological beliefs. You must honestly evaluate the sheer volume of vital energy currently being squandered in the futile attempt to resist the natural transformation of these elements. Fighting against the inevitable flow of change is akin to furiously paddling a vessel against the crushing current of a mighty river. It is an exhausting, ultimately doomed endeavor. Select a specific object of significant emotional value and critically analyze the nature of your bond with it. Attempt to locate your position on a spectrum where total, crippling dependency rests at one end and absolute liberated indifference sits at the other. If the bond skews heavily toward dependency, meticulously document the underlying reasons for this clinging. Is it a desperate attempt to preserve a past emotional high? Is it rooted in the paralyzing fear that the universe will never again provide something of equal value? Calculate the daily expenditure of your mental and physical resources dedicated to guarding, maintaining, and anxiously obsessing over this item. When subjected to this level of scrutiny, the stark reality emerges. The foundation of this attachment is almost exclusively forged from fear. It is the terrified belief that you must aggressively manipulate the fabric of life because you fundamentally lack trust in its benevolent flow. Reflect upon previous losses in your history and objectively assess the new avenues, strengths, and compassions that organically arose in the space left behind by the departed attachment. Detaching from your beliefs. This critical analysis must be turned inward, focusing directly upon the restrictive dogmas previously catalogued in your internal rulebook. Examine the specific, fear-based contracts that dictate your self-worth and interpersonal behaviors. What protective illusion do these specific attachments serve to maintain? The ultimate authority regarding which ideologies to harbor rests entirely with you. By consciously intending to sever your energetic connection to any knowledge that diminishes your spirit or inflicts harm, you initiate a massive reclamation of your personal power. Zoom in, zoom out. When the suffocating weight of a personal crisis threatens to overwhelm your awareness, engage the profound power of your imagination. Envision your perspective as a highly advanced magical lens. When completely zoomed in, the specific details of the immediate conflict fill the entirety of your visual field. The pain, the slights, and the anxieties appear massive and inescapable. However, you possess the conscious ability to rapidly zoom out. As the perspective widens, the immediate room comes into view, then the surrounding city, the sprawling continent, and finally, the entirety of the blue planet suspended against the blackness of space. From this breathtaking cosmic vantage point, the sheer insignificance of the immediate drama becomes undeniably clear. You are a single, luminous speck existing among billions of identical specks, all navigating the exact same emotional turbulence. Continue this outward expansion, pushing past the boundaries of our solar system until the swirling majesty of the entire galaxy is visible. When confronted with the staggering, eternal expanse of the universe, the desperate human compulsion to suffer over minor interpersonal frictions or fleeting material losses appears tragically absurd. In the grand, sweeping narrative of time, our individual existence is but a brief, brilliant flash. The paralyzing grip of an attachment signifies that the consciousness has become completely trapped in the microscopic, zoomed-in mode, falsely believing that the immediate problem constitutes the totality of existence. By continually utilizing this mental exercise to zoom out, the fragile cord tethering you to your anxieties eventually snaps. Detached from the paralyzing fear, you simultaneously detach from the desperation of the problem and the frantic need to control the outcome. You enter a state of elegant, effortless floating within the mighty river of life. Where there is no desperate resistance, the natural illumination of the universe reveals the inherent solution to every human dilemma. You are not a helpless casualty of your conditioning or your circumstances. You are a potent, liberated architect, actively participating in the magnificent art of creation. 7. A dialogue with Don Miguel. The 4 agreements. The 4 foundational principles were forged to serve as vital instruments in the art of profound personal transformation, designed specifically to shatter limiting internal contracts, amass true personal power, and fortify the spirit. When one commits to the rigorous application of these tools, the metamorphosis of the lived experience is not a mere possibility. It is an absolute certainty. The manifestation of this change is initially perceived deep within the personal sphere. The internal climate shifts noticeably as the crushing weight of habitual guilt, the burning sting of shame, and the heavy, exhausting burdens of anger and jealousy begin to organically dissolve. The ultimate metric for this evolutionary progress is not found in intellectual milestones, but in the tangible, undeniable return of one's own authentic happiness. Progress becomes starkly evident when the paralyzing fear of speaking one's truth evaporates, replaced by the quiet courage to articulate desires clearly and banish the defeatist mentality that assumes failure before an endeavor even begins. Naturally, the external world continues to provide essential mirrors, individuals who challenge this newly established peace, which are absolutely necessary for measuring the true depth of this internal evolution. Encountering an antagonistic or severely judgmental authority figure, for instance, provides a vital opportunity to observe a profound decrease in one's own internal drama. The external situation may remain entirely identical to past encounters, yet the personal reaction to the emotional poison is completely neutralized. Without the friction of these interpersonal challenges, the resilience of the newly awakened spirit remains untested. When confronted with a broader society still deeply entrenched in the nightmare of the old, suffering-based dream, maintaining one's enthusiasm requires the profound understanding that another individual's hallucination is not a personal burden to carry or fix. While sharing these liberating principles can forge powerful alliances of mutual support, attempting to forcefully impose awakening upon those who possess no awareness or desire for change is a futile drain of vital energy. The teachings themselves remain entirely neutral, seamlessly compatible with any philosophical or religious framework, because they do not dictate what a person must believe. Rather, they illuminate the mechanism of how to unburden the mind. Imposing a specific worldview merely breeds further dogma and division. The ultimate vision for this wisdom extends naturally to the next generation. By fundamentally altering the domestication process through the awakened consciousness of parents and educators, a new paradigm can be established, shifting the collective dream of humanity at its very roots. Beliefs and agreements. The restrictive convictions we currently harbor were rarely born of conscious choice. We simply lacked the defensive strength to resist our initial social conditioning, ultimately surrendering our faith through silent agreement. When attempting to overwrite these old programs by actively choosing to affirm positive attributes, such as declaring oneself intelligent or beautiful, one must recognize that these too are ultimately mere concepts and constructs of the mind. Pure truth exists entirely independent of these labels. However, the mechanism of action and reaction within the human psyche remains absolute. Choosing to believe in one's inherent inadequacy generates immediate, unavoidable emotional suffering, while consciously choosing to believe in one's worth generates positive, life-affirming emotion. The fundamental choice presented to every individual is whether to elect a paradigm of suffering or to elect a paradigm of joy. Yet, simply repeating positive affirmations while still fundamentally harboring a deep-seated subconscious belief of unworthiness creates a futile, exhausting conflict between the reasoning intellect and the deeply entrenched program. The intellect may loudly claim a new positive belief, but the authentic underlying program continues to dictate the actual emotional reality. The only effective method for dismantling an ingrained agreement is to actively replace it with an empowering alternative and engage in relentless, sustained physical and mental practice until the new dynamic is entirely mastered. As the old, rigid architecture of belief inevitably crumbles under this practice, it is not always strictly necessary to construct a new, equally rigid edifice in its place. The awakened individual can become akin to water, formless, fluid, and perfectly adaptable, assuming whatever shape the present moment necessitates without becoming permanently trapped within it. The vast accumulations of human knowledge and societal rules can then be viewed merely as an elaborate mythology. This mythology serves as a highly useful tool for navigating the shared illusion and communicating effectively within the collective dream, but it is no longer worshipped as an absolute binding truth. The reasoning mind loses its tyrannical analytical grip, replaced by a profound, silent openness to directly feeling and perceiving existence. While consciously creating a new, temporary structure is an available choice for specific interactions. It is executed with the playful awareness of an actor stepping into a role, never mistaking the performance for the ultimate reality. Parasites. From the perspective of ancient wisdom, a heavily domesticated human mind is fundamentally afflicted, controlled by a psychic entity that feeds ravenously upon the emotional turmoil generated by fear, while from a purely detached cosmic viewpoint, such entities might simply be enacting their nature From the perspective of the human host, their presence is experienced as profoundly destructive, consuming vital life force and frequently driving the individual toward deep self-annihilation. Conversely, thoughts, concepts, and agreements that actively nourish the spirit and expand personal liberty act not as parasites, but as powerful, life-giving allies. The internal war is waged specifically to conquer the parasite, transforming the very knowledge that once imprisoned the mind into a supportive instrument that facilitates creation and profound joy. Recognizing the presence of this internal infection is a crucial step toward liberation. Learning to view the parasite's desperate, dramatic maneuvers with a sense of genuine humor is a profound method for dismantling its heavy authority. The widespread misconception that a life devoid of emotional melodrama and suffering equates to a life of unbearable boredom is deeply flawed. True boredom stems exclusively from a state of inaction, not from a lack of internal agony. The parasitic entity can keep a mind frantically occupied with endless sorrow. But authentic engagement arises from the natural human drive to actively participate in the art of creation. We do not suffer simply because suffering is an inescapable requirement of the human condition. We suffer because we are trapped within a severely limiting conceptual definition of what being human entails. We relentlessly divide existence into severe dualities and desperately cling to the exhausting need to be proven right, constantly measuring ourselves against an impossible standard and inflicting punishment for the inevitable shortfall. To navigate the treacherous path of breaking these agreements without the parasite tricking us into turning against our own integrity, one must cultivate a profound skepticism toward the intellect's relentless chatter. The mind will frequently masquerade as the authentic self, proposing false rebellions. The true compass is found in learning to listen exclusively to the undeniable, visceral truth of the physical and emotional body, which never deceives. While we cannot entirely shield the next generation from the process of domestication, we can equip them with the vital awareness to question the projections of others and to fiercely honor their internal truth, thereby arming them for their inevitable battle against their own conditioning. The healing of the broader human consciousness is an undeniable, ongoing trajectory. The collective nightmare is slowly but inexorably evolving into a more enlightened paradigm, driven by the expanding awareness of individuals who choose to reclaim their power. The ultimate highest mission of any individual is remarkably simple: to exist in a state of unburdened happiness, refusing to inject further emotional poison into the shared dream, and fully embracing the vibrant, magnificent reality of being alive. Be impeccable with your word. The entirety of an individual's magical, creative capacity is concentrated within the physical and energetic power of their word. It possesses the absolute ability to either profoundly liberate or permanently enslave both the speaker and the listener. When navigating the treacherous waters of daily social interaction, maintaining this impeccability frequently requires the profound wisdom of silence. If pressed for an opinion that serves no constructive purpose, refusing to engage in the transmission of judgment, simply stating a lack of opinion or asserting that the matter is not one's concern, is a profound act of personal integrity. The arrogant compulsion to forcefully correct the distorted views of others or to violently impose one's own subjective reality upon them is a direct violation of this principle. Individuals possess the sovereign, undeniable right to suffer within the confines of their own illusions if they so choose. Furthermore, brutal honesty delivered entirely devoid of compassion is rarely actually desired by the seeker. People frequently request an opinion solely to gain external validation for their pre-existing, often destructive beliefs. Offering a contradictory truth in these scenarios often results in the weaponization of those words, which are quickly twisted, misinterpreted, and repurposed to fuel further gossip and interpersonal conflict. The profound wisdom of recognizing an impending conversational error and choosing absolute silence is paramount. Attempting to verbally justify or meticulously fix a social misstep often only exacerbates the messy entanglement. The most insidious and destructive form of this dark magic, however, occurs entirely internally. One must absolutely and fiercely refuse to participate in the silent, ongoing gossip regarding one's own perceived inadequacies. When When confronted with an individual who stubbornly refuses to communicate or listen, pouring vital energy into forcefully demanding an interaction is a futile, exhausting drain. Authentic communication requires mutual willing consent. If the channel is firmly closed, true impeccability demands accepting that reality without judgment and consciously withdrawing one's focus. Should someone attempt to spread toxic gossip or emotional poison in your presence, the most potent, impenetrable defense is absolute non-reaction. Without the fertile, receptive ground of an emotional response, the poison finds no purchase, and the toxic exchange naturally withers and dies. True self-love, the foundation of this impeccability, begins with radical, unconditional self-acceptance. Acknowledging the presence of the internal parasite without simultaneously judging or condemning oneself for being infected is the first crucial step toward permanent healing. Any pursuit of self-improvement must stem organically from a joyful desire for expansion, never from a foundation of self-rejection or perceived brokenness. Don't take anything personally. Every single individual is completely encased within the highly specific, subjective architecture of their own distinct hallucination. When a harsh insult is hurled or a severe judgment rendered, it is a transmission originating entirely from the sender's heavily conditioned reality. It bears absolutely no factual connection to the recipient. To truly comprehend the liberating nature of this concept, one must imagine being transported centuries into the past, landing in a society governed by entirely alien, brutal moral codes and superstitious beliefs. When the inhabitants of that era inevitably judge or condemn you based on their terrifying, limited understanding, the sheer absurdity of taking their condemnation personally becomes instantly, glaringly obvious. The modern world operates on the exact same fundamental principle, merely utilizing different, equally arbitrary and fabricated rule books. The violent emotional reactions of others, their explosive rages, their bitter envies, their casual cruelties, are the outward manifestations of an entity deeply possessed by its own internal suffering. A person entirely consumed by anger is effectively experiencing a severe, temporary psychological crisis, temporarily hijacked by their conditioning. Recognizing this tragic state of possession allows the observer to view the venomous outburst not as a targeted personal attack, but as a painful symptom of the attacker's own internal infection. If a critical remark manages to bypass one's defenses and inflict genuine emotional pain, it signifies only one thing: the recipient actively agreed with the judgment, possessing a pre-existing, unhealed wound that the attacker merely illuminated. If an individual holds absolute, unshakable faith in their own inherent worth, external declarations of inadequacy bounce off harmlessly, recognized instantly as the desperate, misguided projections of a fractured mind. Don't make assumptions. The unawakened human intellect is afflicted with a desperate, frantic compulsion to continuously generate assumptions, fatally treating these fabricated, internal scenarios as absolute, verified truth. This restless, uncontrolled mental activity is the primary, devastating engine of unnecessary human drama. The unmanaged mind resembles an untamed beast, violently dragging the consciousness through endless, terrifying labyrinths of hypothetical disasters and frantic interrogations of what if. True mastery requires entirely subjugating this wild intellect, utilizing thought merely as a precise, controlled instrument for direct communication and practical problem-solving, rather than allowing it to run as a continuous, destructive background program. When a genuine challenge arises, the impeccable use of the mind involves identifying a single, viable solution and immediately transitioning into decisive action, rather than endlessly multiplying hypothetical alternatives that only breed paralysis, anxiety, and confusion. It is vital to delineate clearly and ruthlessly between the known, the unknown, and the fundamentally unknowable. We possess accurate knowledge only of our own deeply conditioned internal reality. The internal emotional landscape and interpretive framework of another human being is fundamentally unknowable to us. We perceive only the heavily distorted image they consciously or unconsciously choose to project, which we then further warp through the biased lens of our own beliefs. Operating under the arrogant assumption that others share our exact emotional terrain, logic, or perspective guarantees profound, painful misunderstanding. The only effective antidote to this chaotic, destructive guesswork is the courage to ask direct, clear questions, demanding actual clarity rather than silently inventing terrifying narratives to fill the void of the unknown. Always do your best. The capacity to execute one's absolute best effort is a fundamentally fluid metric, shifting dramatically from moment to moment in direct response to fluctuating physical vitality, emotional stability, and the specific pressing demands of the immediate environment. Furthermore, as the practitioner diligently installs these new, empowering agreements, the baseline standard of what constitutes their best naturally and inevitably elevates. When confronted with an obligation that incites deep internal resistance or profound exhaustion, true impeccability demands radical, unflinching honesty with oneself. If politely declining the task is impossible due to prior commitments or necessary consequences, one must consciously overwrite the internal resistance, actively generating the necessary desire to complete the task thoroughly and without the toxic burden of resentment. Operating from a posture of continuous, exhausted martyrdom, sacrificing one's own fundamental needs to endlessly serve the demands of others, is a profound violation of self-love and personal integrity. When the inevitable accusations of selfishness arise from others upon establishing healthy, necessary boundaries, one must recognize that true selfishness frequently lies in those who demand your perpetual sacrifice to fuel their own comfort. The arduous struggle to maintain these new agreements, the frustrating, painful tendency to regress into familiar, destructive patterns of suffering, is a testament to the sheer cemented power of our initial social conditioning. The internal ledger of rules is sustained entirely by the absolute, unquestioning faith we have invested in it over a lifetime. To fundamentally alter the lived reality, this vital faith must be violently extracted from the false beliefs of inadequacy and consciously, repeatedly redirected toward the new, liberating principles. Crucially, the pursuit of one's best must never mutate into a desperate, exhausting quest for external validation or approval. The pursuit of perfection according to the dictates of the internalized magistrate is a guaranteed, agonizing failure, as the judge's standards are intentionally designed to be forever unattainable. True effort is a purely internal metric, utterly devoid of the need for external applause or the crushing burden of subsequent self-condemnation. By consistently applying one's maximum available capacity in the present moment, the parasitic voices of guilt and regret are starved of the emotional oxygen they require to survive, paving the way for a reality defined by profound, enduring peace. 8. True stories of awareness and transformation. The transition from intellectual comprehension to the visceral, physical application of these four principles marks the true beginning of the practitioner's metamorphosis. The theoretical architecture of these concepts inevitably collides with the messy, unpredictable reality of daily human existence. And it is entirely within this friction that true mastery is forged. When individuals commit to rewriting their internal contracts, the external manifestations are frequently profound and entirely restructuring. Be impeccable with your word. Breaking the agreement to gossip at work. The modern professional environment frequently operates as a highly concentrated breeding ground for emotional toxicity, where colleagues unconsciously bond through the shared exchange of negativity. Gossip functions as a potent, invisible venom passed swiftly through the corridors of power and the break rooms, silently degrading trust and infecting the collective atmosphere. When an individual consciously decides to revoke their participation in this deeply ingrained ritual, the initial reaction from the surrounding environment is often one of suspicion or aggressive pushback. Refusing to offer a receptive ear to the malicious evaluations of management or the personal failings of co-workers starves the energetic parasite that thrives on such drama. The practitioner must learn to gracefully but firmly exit these conversational loops, offering absolute silence or calmly changing the trajectory of the dialogue. Over time, this steadfast refusal to traffic in emotional poison fundamentally shifts the energetic dynamic. the individual becomes a safe harbor within a chaotic sea, and the toxic individuals organically filter themselves away, unable to find fertile soil for their venom. No more bad news. The human intellect harbors a dark fascination with catastrophe, frequently drawn into a hypnotic trance by the endless sensationalized broadcasting of societal trauma and global despair. This continuous consumption of tragedy is not merely informational, it is an active ingestion of fear that deeply pollutes the internal landscape. Practicing absolute impeccability requires a rigorous, unapologetic curation of what enters the mind. By consciously choosing to sever the cord to this relentless stream of despair, the individual reclaims a staggering amount of vital energy previously squandered on anxieties over events entirely beyond their control. Furthermore, this impeccability extends to the refusal to regurgitate this darkness to others. The practitioner ceases to be a conduit for collective panic, choosing instead to focus their conversational energy on the immediate, tangible reality where their actions can genuinely manifest positive change. Being impeccable, to operate with absolute linguistic integrity, is to treat every spoken syllable with the reverence of a loaded weapon. It demands the total cessation of casual dishonesty, the eradication of passive-aggressive remarks designed to inflict hidden wounds, and the abandonment of self-deprecating humor that secretly chips away at one's own foundation. This is a profound slowing down of communication. The practitioner learns to pause before speaking, filtering the rising thought through the strict metric of truth and affection. If a statement does not align with these core values, the most powerful choice becomes the preservation of absolute silence. Through this rigorous discipline, the individual's word reclaims its immense, godlike power of creation, forging an immediate reality defined by crystalline clarity and unwavering, unshakable trust. Using the word with children, adults wield a terrifying, almost absolute authority over the pristine, highly impressionable consciousness of a child. The young mind operates as an open, fertile field, blindly absorbing every seed planted by its caregivers without the critical defenses necessary to reject the toxic ones. A parent's casual remark, born of temporary exhaustion or frustration, can easily be internalized by the child as a permanent, defining truth of their own unworthiness. The awakened guardian recognizes the profound gravity of this dynamic. They meticulously govern their speech, refusing to utilize language as an instrument of shame, manipulation, or control. Instead, their words become deliberate tools for empowerment, consistently reflecting back to the child the undeniable truth of their inherent beauty, their boundless capacity, and their absolute right to a joyful existence. Using the word to judge, the internalized magistrate possesses an insatiable, exhausting appetite for condemnation, constantly seeking to categorize, evaluate, and punish both the self and the surrounding world. This relentless external judgment is merely the internal tyrant projecting its own impossible standards outward, demanding that the entirety of humanity conform to its highly subjective rulebook. Committing to impeccability requires the forceful dismantling of this judgment seat. The practitioner consciously observes the rich tapestry of human behavior without the heavy, distorting lens of moral superiority. They recognize that every individual is acting entirely in accordance with their own specific conditioning and the unique limitations of their personal dream. By dropping the arrogant necessity to constantly assess and sentence others, a profound, expansive internal peace is instantly secured. Constructive self-talk. The most vital and frequently the most arduous battleground for impeccability is the silent, ongoing dialogue occurring within the solitary confines of the mind. For decades, the internal narrative has likely functioned as a cruel, relentless abuser, quick to highlight every flaw and magnify every perceived failure. Reprogramming this internal architecture requires militant, unyielding vigilance. The practitioner must learn to intercept the toxic whispers of the internal judge at their very inception, refusing to grant them the oxygen of belief. This dark magic must be systematically replaced with deliberate, powerful incantations of self-acceptance. The mind must be forcefully transitioned from a hostile, unforgiving penitentiary into a deeply nurturing, deeply supportive sanctuary, where the authentic self is consistently met with profound grace and unconditional affection. Don't take anything personally. Healing the mother-daughter relationship. The dynamic between parent and adult child is often a dense, agonizing web of historical resentments and unfulfilled, unspoken expectations. Decades of heavy conditioning frequently result in interactions that are little more than the collision of two heavily fortified egos, each desperately attempting to force the other to validate their specific version of reality. When a daughter finally grasps the profound reality that her mother's harsh criticisms are not objective truths concerning her own worth, a massive psychological chain is broken. She realizes that the mother's judgments are entirely the agonizing manifestations of the mother's own unhealed wounds, her own terrifying internal judge, and the rigid confines of her own generational conditioning. The venom instantly loses its lethal potency. Where there was once only defensive rage and deep sorrow, a profound, detached compassion emerges. The daughter can observe the mother's suffering without volunteering to become the receptacle for it, breaking the cycle of inherited emotional trauma permanently, not taking ourselves personally. This profound principle must eventually be turned entirely inward, demanding a radical, courageous detachment from one's own chaotic internal narrative. The ego insists that every fleeting emotion, every dark thought, and every moment of fear is of paramount, absolute importance, defining the very core of one's identity. The practitioner learns to step back and view this internal weather with cool, detached curiosity. They recognize that the swirling storms of anxiety or the sudden flares of anger are not the authentic essence of their being. They are merely the predictable reactions of the lingering parasite, the automated firing of old, dying programming. By refusing to take one's own dramatic emotional fluctuations personally, the ego is starved of its central importance, allowing the true, silent observer within to maintain unshakable stability amidst the mind's temporary chaos. The judge and the victim at work. The professional landscape is frequently a highly volatile arena of clashing egos, where deep-seated personal inadequacies masquerade as managerial authority or objective business strategy. When an employee is subjected to the aggressive micromanagement, unwarranted hostility, or unfair evaluation of a superior, the instinct is to internalize the professional critique as a devastating assessment of their fundamental human value. Applying this principle entirely neutralizes the threat. The targeted individual views the superior's toxic behavior not as a reflection of their own work, but as a glaring billboard advertising the superior's own internal terrors and profound lack of self-worth. Secure in their own integrity and the quality of their effort, the employee allows the harsh words to pass right through them, entirely refusing the invitation to adopt the role of the victim in the superior's deeply flawed, agonizing dream. Don't make assumptions. Making assumptions at home. The sanctuaries of our intimate partnerships are routinely decimated by the silent, profoundly arrogant belief that we possess the ability to accurately read the minds of those we love. The unspoken expectation that a partner should intuitively anticipate our needs, decipher our moods, and align with our unvoiced desires creates a highly combustible environment of perpetual disappointment and boiling resentment. We brutally punish our partners for failing to execute a script they were never actually given. The sheer, terrifying courage to demand absolute clarity alters the domestic landscape completely. By asking direct, completely unfiltered questions and fiercely refusing to construct catastrophic internal narratives when faced with ambiguity, the heavy, suffocating fog of assumption is eradicated. Silent, agonizing suffering is replaced by raw, vulnerable, and profoundly authentic connection. Making assumptions at work. Within the complex machinery of the workplace, the human intellect frantically attempts to interpret the ambiguous actions of colleagues and the opaque strategic maneuvers of management. We project our deepest professional insecurities onto the neutral behaviors of others, fabricating elaborate conspiracies and phantom adversaries where none actually exist. A delayed email response is instantly interpreted as an impending termination. A closed-door meeting is assumed to be a targeted critique of our performance. This uncontrolled generation of fictional disasters drains massive reserves of productive energy. The awakened professional refuses to engage with these mental phantoms. They halt the spiraling narrative instantly, demanding concrete, verifiable facts through direct inquiry, refusing to allow their emotional stability to be hijacked by the terrifying illusions of their own unmanaged mind. Making assumptions about ourselves. The most devastating assumptions we harbor are the rigid, unyielding limitations we place upon our own potential. We continuously and drastically underestimate our inherent capacities, paralyzed by the assumed, unquestioned certainty of our own inadequacy. We silently decree that specific achievements, profound psychological healing, or radical life changes are simply beyond our designated station, never once daring to test the actual structural integrity of these internalized boundaries. Shattering these self-directed assumptions is a terrifying, exhilarating act of rebellion. It requires stepping boldly into the vast, unpredictable arena of the unknown, actively challenging the internal magistrate's authority and proving the assumed limitations entirely false through the undeniable evidence of direct, lived experience. Making assumptions about a handicapped society possesses a deeply entrenched, highly restrictive tendency to forcefully define individuals entirely by their perceived physical or psychological limitations. When a person is marked with the label of a handicap, the collective hallucination immediately constructs a claustrophobic box of assumptions regarding their capabilities, their intelligence, and their fundamental worth. True, awakened awareness demands the complete, violent dismantling of these prejudices. The practitioner recognizes the absolute, indomitable nature of the spirit that resides within the physical vessel. They understand that the essence of a human being is entirely unrestricted by external biological definitions of normality, refusing to limit another's potential based on the narrow, terrified assumptions of the societal dream. Always do your best, taking action because you want to. The vast majority of human existence is dragged forward under the crushing, oppressive weight of heavy obligation. We perform tasks, pursue careers, and maintain relationships not out of genuine joy, but to frantically appease the demands of the internal judge or to secure fleeting, unreliable external validation. When this principle is fully embodied, the fundamental fuel source of a person's life changes entirely. Actions are no longer executed from a posture of fearful servitude. Instead, they stem from a profound, authentic desire to actively participate in the magnificent art of creation. The suffocating texture of duty evaporates, replaced instantly by the buoyant electrical energy of deliberate, joyous engagement with the present moment. Doing your best, no more and no less. The pursuit of excellence is frequently hijacked by the ego, mutating into a desperate, exhausting quest for an impossible, flawless ideal, pushing the physical and emotional vessel relentlessly beyond its natural biological limits. In this futile pursuit merely depletes vital life force and guarantees eventual catastrophic collapse. Conversely, withholding one's capacity out of apathy or fear invites the highly corrosive, paralyzing presence of guilt. True mastery is found in the exquisite, highly attuned equilibrium of the immediate present. It requires accurately assessing one's available energetic resources in any given moment, acknowledging physical fatigue or emotional distress, and applying that specific, available capacity fully, without holding back and without crossing the dangerous threshold into self-destruction. No guilt or blame. When the absolute maximum effort has been honestly applied to a specific endeavor in the present moment, the internal magistrate is entirely stripped of its primary weapons of psychological torture. Regardless of the external outcome, whether the endeavor results in spectacular recognized triumph or perceived objective failure, the internal state of the practitioner remains one of unshakable, profound peace. The awakened mind recognizes that the ultimate results are frequently dictated by a complex web of universal forces entirely beyond personal control. Therefore, they absolutely refuse to shoulder the paralyzing, useless burden of self-condemnation for the uncontrollable, ever-shifting currents of life. The 4 agreements at the office. The modern workplace serves as the ultimate, unforgiving crucible for the synthesis of all 4 principles. It requires navigating complex, rigid hierarchies, dodging the aggressive projections of competing egos, and managing high-pressure demands without ever surrendering one's internal sovereignty. The professional realm fundamentally transforms from a toxic landscape of chronic stress and desperate survival into a dedicated, high-stakes laboratory for spiritual mastery. Every challenging interaction, every unreasonable demand, and every workplace conflict becomes a highly valuable opportunity to aggressively flex the muscles of linguistic impeccability, absolute detachment, clear inquiry, and dedicated, joyful effort. New agreements save a crumbling relationship. The ultimate, undeniable testament to the sheer explosive power of these principles is their capacity to resurrect interpersonal bonds that appear entirely, irreparably shattered. When two individuals within a failing dynamic commit to the brutal work of stripping away their protective, suffocating assumptions, refusing to internalize the agonizing pain of the other, speaking with absolute, unflinching, compassionate truth, and showing up fully and energetically in the present moment, the accumulated rotting debris of past resentments is rapidly cleared away. A fundamentally new, robust, and breathtakingly beautiful architecture of love is systematically established directly upon the ashes of the old, suffering-based dynamic, proving that true transformation is always eternally possible.